Hello everybody. So for today's video, we are going to be talking about Stephanie Thomas and Ukea Davis. And this is a video that took a lot of research and a lot of diving. There's a lot more information than I thought I would have, but there's not like a whole lot of photos. This is definitely a case where I recommend you going and doing your own research. You look into it yourself, because you're probably going to find more details than even I did. And this case does not have a satisfying ending. It has a very frustrating ending, and it is one where people just need to know the facts, they need to know the story, and the names and faces need to be out there. So like I said, we're talking about Stephanie Thomas and Ukea Davis. All the links that I used for research will be down below, like always, and let's get into this video. So Stephanie and Ukea were trans teens who did everything together. They were very close. They even transitioned at the same time after meeting at a local Washington organization for LGBT, LGBT teens called SMYAL. They transitioned together and shared an apartment. Unfortunately, I couldn't really find much else about themselves, like what they were like, their family lives, how they grew up, that kind of thing. So for the most part, all I could find about like them personally was that bit right there, like who they were together. So we're going to go ahead and get into the case. Around 11:30 p.m. on August 11th, 2002, the two 19-year-olds told friends that they were going to a nearby gas station for cigarettes. Nobody can say for sure where they actually went, but just a little after 3 a.m., they were sitting in Stephanie's Camry at a stop sign on the corner of 50th and C, almost home. But then a car came up beside them, and the two were pelted with bullets from a semi-automatic weapon. According to an eyewitness report, another car approached after the shooting. A man got out to see what had happened, and Ukea was already dead at this time, and when the man nudged Stephanie's shoulder to see if she was still alive, she moaned in confirmation, so she was still alive. But the man fled when the shooter's car returned, so the shooter actually came back. The gunman got out and fired more shots into the car, making sure that Stephanie was dead. By the time that rescue workers would get there and reach the bloody car, Stephanie would then also be dead. Each girl had been shot at least 10 times. And I just want to say that it says at least. In my research, it all said at least 10 times. Like, that just feels so angry. Ukea and Stephanie would be buried together, and they would share a headstone. For almost 20 years, no one was arrested or held accountable, and this left the families without answers. It would also take as long for police to finally admit that this was a hate crime. In 2020, the DC police disclosed who they have identified as the killer: Michael Dupree Price of Southeast DC. And he himself was shot to death in an unsolved murder in May 2017. He was 36 at that time. At the time he was shot. DC Police Chief Peter Newsham did a telephone interview with the Washington Blade where he said, two recently found, quote, ear witnesses, not eyewitnesses, but ear witnesses, told homicide detective Daniel Whalen that Michael Dupree Price had admitted to the witnesses that he killed the two women and said he did it because he learned that they were trans and that made him angry. So, an ear witness is a person who didn't witness the crime taking place but spoke directly to the person involved in the crime. So they spoke directly to Michael, therefore making them an ear witness. And this is going to be a very, very long quote, but this is a quote taken from Peter Newsham, the DC police chief. And Peter says, quote, "So the way they were able to close the case was that the detective went back into the file, and it's always good to have a fresh set of eyes on these older cases. He found a document that had not been followed up on, which led him to a witness. It was a person who was already in jail, and that person gave some pretty specific information to the investigator that led him to believe the suspect in the case essentially told him what happened. And then the investigator was able to find a second person who did the same thing. So we're pretty confident that this suspect, Michael Dupree Price, was the one responsible. End quote. So that was just him basically explaining like how they came to find these witnesses and what makes them so sure that it was Michael Dupree Price. I'm sorry, his name is like tongue twisting in my mouth, so I'm sorry if I'm like keep messing it up. Peter Newsham also says that the girls being transgender was the reason for their homicides because the two witnesses were both very emphatic on this fact. And this is another quote from Newsham, and it's also is like kind of like taken from the direct quote from a witness. So I'm sorry if it's like a little weird. So Price told one of the witnesses that he had killed he had killed them because they tricked him into believing they were girls, and one had engaged in a sexual act with him. Price also told the second witness he killed them after learning they were trans at some point after the three were smoking marijuana together. So I guess he didn't realize at first that they were trans. They were getting high together, and he learned that they were trans. He got angry, and he then killed them. So he feels like he was like tricked, which he wasn't tricked because they are girls. He's just a piece of shit. So Queen Washington, Stephanie's mom, said that she strongly disputes the claim that Michael Price didn't know that they were trans. She said at the time of the murder and even before, people who knew her daughter and Ukea told her Michael Price, who also lived in the Marshall Heights neighborhood as them, so like the same area, they all knew that the two girls were clearly transgender, and they just knew the girls in general. So it wasn't like some weird like surprise. So this is a quote from Queen, so Stephanie's mom, and she says, "It's a lie. Everybody in the neighborhood knew who Stephanie and Ukea were, that they were transgender. He lived only a few blocks from Stephanie, and his name would come up. Nobody believes the story by these witnesses that Price was shocked when he learned that they were transgender. I think Michael Price liked Stephanie. My thought on the motive is Stephanie had a relationship with Price, and something went wrong, and he killed her." End quote. And that is what Queen thinks actually happened, like the actual motive. That maybe he actually really did like Stephanie, and maybe like he was like ashamed or something, or embarrassed. Um, or maybe something did go wrong, and she was then killed as along with Ukea. So LGBTQ plus activists have said men charged with murdering trans women often use the quote trans panic defense as an alibi for their action, saying that they were shocked when they learned a woman with whom they had been had a sexual encounter with turned out to be transgender. Activists and others familiar with crimes against trans people say the panic defense is often used as an excuse by perpetrators who knew all along that their victims were trans and had other motives, including hatred or whatever else, for committing the crime. While police have only given Michael Price, named him as the killer, it's believed by Queen and others in the neighborhood that at least one other man participated in the killing. This person is Ricardo Smith, who went by the name Black, and he was a friend of Price. Some believe Ricardo was the driver of a third car that blocked the girls from escaping Price, who neighbors believe was chasing her car minutes before she and Ukea were shot to death. So trans rights activist or advocate Arlene Budd, who said that she arrived at the scene of the shooting shortly after the incident took place, said nearby residents reported seeing what appeared to be a car chase with one car following the Camry. One witness heard a loud screeching noise of a car slamming on its brakes, saw her car stopped behind the side of a third car, which had appeared to deliberately block Stephanie from driving away from the car chasing her. So there was a third car that was ahead of them, was blocking the road where Stephanie and Ukea could not escape. They were being chased by this other car. They slam on their brakes to not hit this car, and they're blocked. The killer gets out, shoots them to death. The cars leave, is basically what they are trying to explain happened in this situation. And the articles that I read, because there was one really, really good article that was really explaining the scene, will be linked down below. I can't remember what it was. I'll try to have it at the top. But it had a lot of really good information about what those witnesses saw, when the ones that were seeing the car chase happen. There's a lot of extra information that I just am not including in this video for time's sake, that you should definitely go and do your own research on, because that article will have information uh, that just kind of clears up maybe how weird I'm explaining things, or just gives more information in greater detail. So we have a quote from, I think her name is Erlene or Erlene Budd. Um, but we have a quote from them, and they say, "What we know is they were chased, and we saw these skid marks on the street. The witnesses said they were chased and that they were blocked off, and that's why they were able to shoot them and kill them in the car. They, not him, they." So or they, because I don't know if Erlene or Earlene is a woman or not. They, apologies, I'm sorry. So basically what they are saying is that it wasn't just Michael Price. There was definitely more than one person. That's how he was able to kill them. So we're missing the other person, you know what I'm saying? But unfortunately, Ricardo Smith died in prison between 2018 to late 2019, and we don't know the cause of death, we just know that he died. So, like I said earlier, Michael Price was shot, and that was on May 5th, 2017 at 4:56 a.m. That's according to police reports. He was found unconscious on a sidewalk, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds, and died a short time later. And to this day, the case is still unsolved. So, decades have passed, and these two girls have not been given justice. I mean, yeah, sure, now we have an idea of who the killer or killers are. We have an idea of what happened. We have an idea of why it happened. But they'll never be brought to justice. Because you can't charge a dead man. That's what they say, like, when the person who does this dies, the reason why they can't go forward with the trial is because you can't charge a dead man, because they're not here to defend themselves. Even if we just know what happened, we still can't do it, and it's frustrating, because these families, this case is basically, in a way, always going to be unsolved because of that. There's never going to be actual justice. Those men are never going to serve time for what they did. Essentially, they've gotten away with it. Yes, Ricardo was in prison for whatever reason. Yes, Michael Price was shot on a sidewalk. They still essentially got away with it. They were never charged for these crimes. Therefore, these women's blood are never going to be, like, officially on their hands, I guess you could say. And that's frustrating, because we have all this information now, which I 100% believe we had it then, and the cops just truly did not give a shit. And I think it took pressure from advocates, activists, the families, for them to finally admit that, yeah, it's a hate crime. I think that's pretty obvious, because just them being shot so much, at least 10 times each, that is angry. That feels personal. You're trying to tell me that it wasn't someone angry. Why do you think they're angry? What do we know about these girls? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that this was probably a hate crime. And I believe in the article that I got a lot of the information from, even the police admit that several times Michael's name had come up to them about being a possible suspect. And they just didn't care to look into it. It's so upsetting, the lack of care in this case. It could have been solved a very long time ago, and it just wasn't. And if it had been, maybe those men would have been charged with something. But that is everything I have for you guys today on Stephanie Thomas and Ukea Davis. Thank you so much for listening to their stories. Please let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you guys very soon. Bye, guys.